Welcome back to the Banger Bar for this week's edition of Overkill Reviews. And this week, we're doing something a little bit different. We're going back in time, way back in time, 3 decades to the year 1987. And I'm going to review the top 5 metal albums of that year as voted by you. But before we get into the reviews, what exactly was going on in 1987? Well, the stock market crashed, and topping the charts was Bon Jovi, Michael Jackson, and George Michael. And can you believe it? The top grossing film of the year was 3 Men and a Baby. So, thank the gods for metal. Let's get into it. Okay, here we go. The 5th best metal record as voted by you from the year 1987 is Halloween, Keeper of the Seven Keys, Part 1.
'Cause we are live in future world, a world that's full of love. Our future life will be glorious. Come with me, future world.
Okay, so Keeper of the Seven Keys, Part 1, of course, is the second album from Germany's Halloween, following up on their debut Walls of Jericho. Keeper Part 1, of course, released on the legendary Noise Records. And you know, many people have called this the Bible of power metal, the Old Testament. Not sure what the New Testament is, but anyway. And you know, listening to this album 30 years later, you can really hear almost every hallmark of power metal in this record. You've got the heroic vocals from Michael Kiske, and of course, Kai Hansen took on the songwriting lead on this record, and it's really Iron Maiden meets Metallica. There's really some fantastic, epic work on this album and really sets the template for the power metal future. Of course, the production values of 1987 leave a little to be desired given the standards of 2017. And really, there's not much to fault about this record because, of course, we know how enormously influential it has become. And the only thing I can say is it doesn't really stack up to the next 4 records I'm going to dig into. So for that reason, 3.5 skulls out of 5. Next one. Moving on to number 4 as voted by you guys. It's one of the biggest metal albums and one of the biggest albums ever. GNR, Appetite for Destruction. Okay, I mean, most of us know the story here. It's Guns N' Roses' debut album, which in and of itself is pretty fucking impressive. It goes on to sell 30 million copies worldwide. And you know, at the time in 87, when LA was still kind of caught up in the glam metal haze, GNR offered something a little bit different, something a lot more raw, more blues-oriented, and much more steeped in, shall we say, 70s guitar-driven music. And of course, what's to dispute here? 3 songs on this record: Paradise City, Sweet Child of Mine, and Welcome to the Jungle. These are mammoth tracks. I will say, however, I'm not sure that the rest of the tracks have held up as well as the big 3. And of course, the other important thing to mention here is that this is a hugely polarizing record in the metal community. Many of us don't even consider this to be a metal album at all. But anyway, it was voted number 4 by you guys. Hey, fantastic record, 4.5 skulls out of 5. Let's move on. Moving on to album number 3 as voted by you. It's the debut from the 5th of the big 5 of Bay Area thrash, Testament: The Legacy. Now, a little history on this record. The name The Legacy, of course, was the name of Testament before they became Testament, if that makes any sense. And it's the only album to feature songwriting credits from the original singer of Testament, Steve Souza, who, of course, around this time moved on to fellow thrash metal compatriots Exodus. Now, going back to 1987, I was 13 years old. I remember The Legacy being a really fucking huge record. It had this massive thrash metal guitar sound, really huge in the bottom end, and I liked it. It had that kind of almost Master of Puppets sound going on. However, looking back, it doesn't hold up as much as I was expecting. The rest of the production doesn't really stand up to that huge guitar sound. And apart from, say, Over the Wall and First Strike is Deadly and a few other tracks, not as many of these songs were as memorable as I was expecting. So, great record from Testament. Thrash would never be the same without it. However, from the vantage point of 2017, it's 3.5 skulls out of 5. Okay, 2 albums to go, and coming in at number 2, as voted by you, is arguably the most important death metal album of all time. Coming in at number 2, of course, is Death, Scream Bloody Gore, the debut album from Florida's Chuck Schuldiner, who, of course, became regarded as probably one of the most important musicians in the history of metal, certainly extreme metal. You know, listening to this record 30 years later, it's very, very primitive. The time is slipping all over the place. There's some real innocence in this album, but let's not forget that no one was growling like Chuck Schuldiner in 1987, and no one was slowing things down to that real ballsy, haunting, almost doomy death metal pace. And I gotta add a personal note here. When I was 13, I was obsessed with all of the extreme metal demos that were coming out of Florida and out of Sweden and, of course, out of Brazil with Sepultura. My buddies and I used to sit around and listen even to the early Mantis demos, which at that time had Cam Lee on vocals. So this record for me is very close to the heart. Zombie Ritual, Baptized in Blood, Evil Dead. These were songs that was the beginning of the end for many of us. So, what can I say? Death, Scream, Bloody Gore. It is a classic, basically created death metal, maybe Possessed. I put my money on Scream, Bloody Gore. 4.5 skulls out of 5. Okay, here we are. The number 1 metal album of 1987, as voted by you, viewers of Banger TV. Sounds like this.
So listen when I drive down the hill. I'm thinking of a soul, but just a second fool. Shut up, I don't want to hear you all. The mother made a monster, now get the hell out of my house.
That, of course, is the sound of Anthrax's Among the Living, the band's 3rd studio album released on Island/Megaforce Records. Now, admittedly, I was a little bit anxious hearing that this was the number 1 album as voted by you guys. And also, back when I was 13 in 1987, Among the Living was not my favorite metal record. But I gotta say, listening to it again for the first time in a while, this is a killer album that has really stood the test of time. First of all, the quality of the production seems to really stand up. Of course, the mighty Eddie Kramer was behind this record, but there's a certain sound on this record that doesn't have a lot of the big, washy reverb that we're hearing in albums like The Legacy or even Scream Bloody Gore. The drumming by Charlie Benante is absolutely spectacular and would even hold up today. Some really fast thrash tempos, and the double bass work is phenomenal. Also, the riffs and the transitions still hold their own. Hats off to Scott Ian and the boys for really writing a lot of songs that have stood the test of time. I'm of course talking about Cotton and Mosh, I Am the Law, Indians, and almost every track on this record still feels very fresh. So, what else to say? I agree with you guys for once, and I'm going to give this album a full 5 out of 5 skulls on Overkill Reviews. But before I go, I gotta give an honorable mention to some really important records that were close in the running. I'm talking, of course, about Bathory, Under the Sign of the Black Mark, King Diamond, Abigail, Sepultura, Schizophrenia, Napalm Death, Scum, the list goes on. Good year in metal, 87. Maybe not quite as good as 86, but hey, it helped us all get through 3 Men and a Baby. So, see you next time on Overkill Reviews.